When I called my son to ask a simple question, when is the wedding? I never expected my entire world to tilt off its axis. I wasn't even speaking to him at first. His wife, Lena, picked up the phone. She looked at me with a smile that felt rehearsed, almost smug, and said casually, "Oh, we got married yesterday." Yesterday. For a moment, I thought I misheard her. I laughed nervously and asked her to repeat it. That's when she added the words that would stay with me forever. We only invited special people. The room felt smaller, heavier. I stood in my own living room, gripping the phone like it might fall out of my hand. My son, Max, stood nearby, staring at the floor as if the carpet had suddenly become fascinating. He didn't defend me. He didn't explain. He didn't even look at me. I had been paying their rent for 3 years, every month, $500 transferred without fail. I had bought their sofa, their bed, their dining table. I stocked their fridge when they struggled. I had even helped pay for Lena's dress, money I believed was for a wedding I would attend. Apparently, I wasn't special enough. In my closet, a soft pink dress still hung with the tag attached. I'd spent weeks choosing it, imagining standing proudly beside my son on his big day. I'd bought new shoes to match. I'd even set aside money for a generous wedding gift. None of it mattered. Max finally spoke, his voice flat and prepared. "Mom, it was very small. Just us and witnesses." A lie. Later that night, I saw the photos online. Lena's parents smiling, her siblings raising glasses, champagne, white flowers, a celebration I had unknowingly funded and been excluded from. A week passed in silence. Then my phone rang. Lena's voice was different this time. No confidence, no smile. Panic crept into every word. "The rent is overdue. The landlord is threatening eviction. You forgot to send the money." Forgot. I thought about all the times I had skipped things for myself so they'd be comfortable. The meals I simplified, the plans I canceled, the savings I dipped into. Then I heard myself say something I'd never said before. I only help special people. The silence on the other end was immediate and complete. She stumbled, confused, offended. "What do you mean? We're family." Family. For years, I had twisted myself into whatever shape they needed: quiet, giving, available. I believed love meant sacrifice, even when it hurt. That night, I cried. Not because they hurt me, but because I finally understood how much of myself I had given away to people who never planned to give anything back. And when I woke up the next morning, something inside me had hardened. I wasn't broken. I was done. But cutting them off emotionally was easy compared to what happened next. Because when the money stopped, they didn't just get angry, they got desperate. The morning after that call, I didn't rush to my phone like I used to. No anxious checking, no rehearsing apologies in my head. I made coffee slowly, sat at my kitchen table, and listened to the quiet. For years, my mornings had started with worry. Did Max need something? Was Lena short on money again? Was there another emergency waiting in my inbox? But that day, there was nothing, just silence and the sound of my own breathing. I opened my bank folder. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't angry enough for that. I just wanted the truth. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. Rent, $500 every month for 3 years. Food and supplies, at least $200 a month. Furniture, repairs, gifts, holidays, birthdays, unexpected problems. By the time I was done adding everything up, my hands were shaking. Over $30,000. Money that should have gone toward my retirement, toward peace, toward the life my late husband and I had planned together. Instead, it had quietly funded two adults who treated me like a background character in their lives. My phone rang. Max, I let it ring. 10 minutes later, Lena. Ignored. A message followed. "Mom, please answer. This is serious." For the first time, I deleted a message from my own son without responding. That afternoon, I did something radical. I went to the bank, not to send money, but to stop it. The manager recognized me instantly. He always did. I was one of his most consistent clients, though never for myself. "I need to cancel all automatic transfers, Ma," I said. He blinked. "All of them?" Yes. He hesitated, lowering his voice. Are you sure everything's okay? I nodded, and for the first time, it wasn't a lie. While he processed the paperwork, my phone buzzed nonstop. It felt almost surreal, like they could sense the money slipping away. I turned my phone off completely. When I walked out of the bank, I felt lighter. Not happy, not yet. But free in a way I hadn't felt in years. That feeling didn't last long. When I pulled into my driveway, there were cars parked outside my house, Max's, Lena's, and one I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. They had keys. I had given them keys years ago, trusting they'd respect my space, trusting that one day they'd care for me the way I cared for them. I opened the door. They were inside, sitting, waiting, like I was the guest. An older man stood near my dining table, flipping through my documents. My documents. This is my house, I said, my voice steady but cold. Why are you here? Lena rushed toward me with forced relief. Thank God. We were worried. This is a lawyer. He's here to help. Help? The lawyer smiled professionally and introduced himself, speaking slowly, as if to a child. Your family is concerned about your recent behavior. Concerned. That's when I understood. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about feelings. This was about control. And they were willing to take it by force. But what they tried to do next wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. And it would change our relationship forever. The lawyer stepped closer, holding a folder like it was already his property. Mrs. Richter, he said calmly, your son and daughter-in-law are worried that you're no longer making sound decisions. I almost laughed. For decades, I had paid bills on time, raised a child alone, managed a household, and stretched money farther than most people ever could. And now, because I stopped paying their rent, I was suddenly unstable? Max finally spoke, rubbing his hands together nervously. Mom, we're just trying to help you. You've been acting different. Different. Yes, I was different. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't handing over my savings with a smile anymore. Lena stepped in, her voice soft, practiced. At your age, confusion happens. Stress, loneliness, it can affect judgment. There it was. Not concern, discrediting. I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was survival. I'm not confused, I said firmly, and you have no right to go through my papers. The lawyer cleared his throat. We're exploring temporary solutions. A power of attorney would allow Max to manage your finances until things stabilize. Temporary. That word echoed in my head. Temporary control? Temporary loss of freedom? Temporary theft dressed up as care? I took the folder from his hands and dropped it straight into the trash. You're leaving, I said. Now. Lena's expression cracked for a moment before hardening into something ugly. You can't just cut us off like this. We made plans based on your support. Plans, not love, not family. Plans. Max raised his voice, frustration spilling out. We have bills, Mom. The rent, the car payments, you co-signed for things. And you're adults, I replied. Adults who got married without me and still expected me to pay. The lawyer tried again, this time with quiet authority. If this continues, the court may need to assess your capacity. That was the moment fear hit me. Not sharp, but cold. They weren't bluffing. They were trying to legally take my independence. I pointed toward the door. Get out of my house! Max looked at me like I'd slapped him. You'll regret this. You'll end up alone. I met his eyes. I've been alone for years. I just didn't realize it. They left, but not before Lena turned back and said, This isn't over. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because my mind was racing. I replayed every conversation, every warning sign I had ignored. The fake affection, the guilt trips, the way money always replaced love. At dawn, I made a decision. If they were preparing for a legal fight, so was I. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in the office of an attorney who specialized in protecting seniors. He listened without interrupting, flipping through my bank records with growing concern. This is financial exploitation, he said bluntly. And what they attempted yesterday borders on coercion. For the first time, someone said it out loud. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't confused. I was being used. We changed my will, locked down my accounts, documented everything. When I left his office, I knew one thing for certain. They had underestimated me. But cutting off their access to my money was only the beginning, because soon they would come back with something far more dangerous than words. The first thing I did after leaving my lawyer's office was change every lock on my house. It felt symbolic, but it was also necessary. Max and Lena still had keys. Keys I had handed over freely, believing trust was permanent just because love once existed. I had learned, too late, that trust without boundaries becomes permission. The locksmith worked quietly while I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't even tasted. With every metallic click of a new lock sliding into place, I felt something inside me settle. Safety. That evening, my phone exploded with missed calls. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, voicemails filled with panic, anger, and accusation. Lena cried in one message, "You're destroying this family." Max was furious in another. "You're letting strangers turn you against us." Strangers. The irony was painful. The only strangers were the people who had lived off me while pretending to love me. I didn't reply. The next morning, I went somewhere I hadn't visited in years, my hair salon. I used to cancel appointments constantly because there was always a financial emergency for them. This time, I sat in the chair and let someone take care of me. "You look lighter," my stylist said as she worked, "like you've let go of something heavy." I smiled, realizing she was right. When I got home, a woman was sitting on my porch. She stood as soon as she saw me. "I'm Eleanor, your neighbor. I heard raised voices here the other day and wanted to check if you're okay." Her concern was genuine. No agenda. No hidden request. I invited her in. Over coffee, I told her everything: the wedding, the money, the lawyer, the threats. She listened quietly, nodding with a sadness that told me she understood more than she wanted to admit. "My daughter tried something similar," she said softly. "When I stopped paying, I suddenly became confused." That word again. Eleanor squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing. It's terrifying at first, but it gets better." Her words stayed with me. That night, my doorbell rang. I checked the new camera system on my phone. Max and Lena stood outside, tense, angry, not knocking, just waiting. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called my lawyer. Minutes later, police arrived. Calm, professional. They asked Max and Lena to leave my property immediately. Max yelled, "This is insane! She's our mother!" The officer replied calmly, "Sir, she has asked you to leave." As they drove away, I stood behind my locked door, heart pounding, not with fear, but with relief. The following days were strangely peaceful. I walked in the mornings. I cooked meals just for myself. I slept better than I had in years. But peace, I learned, makes desperate people reckless. On Friday morning, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was a woman in a professional suit holding a folder. "Mrs. Richter," she said politely, "I'm from Senior Services. We've received a report requesting a wellness check." My stomach dropped. Max and Lena had escalated. They weren't just angry anymore. They were trying to take my life out of my hands completely. And what they told authorities about me would force the biggest confrontation of all, one that could cost me everything if I wasn't careful. I invited the woman from Senior Services inside, even though every instinct told me not to. Her name was Ms. Schmidt. She spoke gently, but her words were sharp, carefully chosen, like tools meant to pry something open. "We've received concern," she said, opening her folder. "Reports that you've suddenly changed your financial behavior, cut off close family, and installed security systems due to fear." I almost laughed at how neatly Lena's voice echoed through those sentences. "I'd like to call my lawyer," I replied calmly. "This isn't an interrogation," she said. "It's just a wellness check." I held my ground. "Then my lawyer can be present." That single sentence changed the atmosphere in the room. 20 minutes later, my attorney arrived. He reviewed her documents, his jaw tightening with every page. When he looked up, his voice was calm, but deadly serious. My client is not required to answer further questions. And based on what I'm seeing here, this report appears misleading at best. Ms. Schmidt hesitated. The confidence she walked in with had cracked. I spoke then, slowly and clearly. I stopped giving money to my adult son because I realized I was being used. That doesn't make me unstable. It makes me awake. She asked questions anyway, about my memory, my routines, my health. I answered without emotion. I knew this wasn't about truth. It was about building a narrative. When she finally left, my lawyer exhaled sharply. They're testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push. Push. They didn't stop there. Days later, I learned Max and Lena had contacted relatives, neighbors, even my pharmacist, spreading quiet doubts about my mental health. Not loud accusations, subtle ones. She's not herself lately. She's isolating. She's acting paranoid. Each word was a seed. That's when my lawyer told me the truth. They may try to file for guardianship. The word made my chest tighten. Guardianship meant losing control of my money, my home, my choices, my life. All because I said no. We acted fast. I underwent a full medical and psychological evaluation, memory tests, cognitive exams, financial reasoning assessments. I passed every single one, above average for my age. The doctor smiled warmly. You're sharp, grounded, and emotionally aware. There's no indication of impairment. Relief washed over me, but it didn't erase the fear, because logic doesn't always stop greed. That evening, Eleanor came by with dinner. She listened quietly as I told her everything. When I finished, she looked me straight in the eyes. They're not worried about you, she said. They're worried about losing access. She was right. The truth became painfully clear. My independence threatened their lifestyle. Days later, the official notice arrived. Max and Lena were formally petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paper, hands steady, but heartbroken. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. They were willing to erase my autonomy, rewrite my identity, and label me broken, all for money. My lawyer looked at me carefully. This will be ugly, but you're not alone. I nodded. I had done everything for my son. Now, for the first time, I would do something for myself. I would fight. But what happened in that courtroom would expose their true intentions in a way none of us, including the judge, could ignore. Continue and write part 6 as per my above given instructions. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. I woke before sunrise, dressed carefully, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I didn't see a confused woman. I saw someone tired, but clear. Someone wounded, but standing. At the courthouse, Max and Lena sat on the opposite side of the room. They didn't greet me. Lena avoided my eyes entirely. Max looked uncomfortable, like a child forced to lie in front of a teacher. Their lawyer spoke first. He painted a neat, tragic picture. An elderly woman, suddenly withdrawn, influenced by outsiders, making irrational financial decisions. According to him, I had been manipulated into cutting off my loving family. Loving. Then Lena took the stand. She cried. Not softly, strategically. I'm worried about her, she said, dabbing her eyes. She's not the woman she used to be. My lawyer's cross-examination was brief and precise. When was the last time you called my client without asking for money? Silence. Were you invited to her wedding? He asked. Lena hesitated. It was small. Did you tell her only special people were invited? Her face flushed. She didn't answer. Max testified next. He spoke about concern, about fear, about wanting to help his mother. Then my lawyer asked one question that shifted the room. How much money has your mother given you in the last 3 years? Max shrugged. I don't know. Would $30,000 sound accurate? Max swallowed hard. And when the money stopped, my lawyer continued, is that when your concern about her mental health began? The judge leaned forward. Then came their witnesses. A neighbor who admitted he'd never spoken to me directly. A doctor who had never examined me. Hearsay dressed as concern. Finally, it was my turn. I stood slowly and walked to the stand. I told the truth, without anger, without tears. I spoke about years of financial support, about missed calls and less money was needed, about being excluded from my own son's wedding while paying for it, about the moment I said no and suddenly became unstable. Why did you stop supporting them financially? My lawyer asked. Because I realized I was being used, I replied calmly, and I decided my life had value beyond my bank account. Their lawyer tried to confuse me, tried to twist my words, tried to suggest loneliness had clouded my judgment, but clarity doesn't shake easily. Then my doctor testified. She is mentally competent, emotionally stable, and fully capable of managing her affairs. Friends testified, neighbors, professionals, people who saw me living, not spending. The judge recessed for deliberation. 2 hours felt like 2 years. When he returned, the courtroom was silent. This court finds no evidence of incompetence, he said firmly. This petition is denied. My chest tightened, not from fear, but release. Then he added something I'll never forget. The evidence suggests this action was motivated by financial dependency rather than genuine concern. I didn't look at Max or Lena. I didn't need to. I had my answer. I walked out free, but changed. Because winning the case didn't heal the truth. It confirmed it. I thought the worst was over. But what Max did after losing the case revealed just how far he was willing to go. Continue and write. Part 7 as per my above given instructions. Winning the case should have felt like relief. In many ways, it did. I had my autonomy, my finances, my freedom. The court had seen the truth. On paper, I was safe. Emotionally, though, the silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Max didn't call, Lena didn't text. No apology, no explanation, no goodbye. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment I stopped being useful. For days, I moved through my house slowly, noticing how different it felt without the constant pressure of obligation. I cooked when I wanted, slept when I wanted, spent money without guilt, for the first time in decades. Still, grief found its way in. Not for the relationship I had, but for the one I believed I had. Eleanor noticed. You're mourning, she said gently over tea one afternoon. Not losing them, losing the illusion. She was right. I had lost my son long before the courtroom. I just didn't admit it. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single page written in Max's handwriting. You didn't have to humiliate us. You chose strangers over family. Don't expect forgiveness. I read it twice. There was no apology, no accountability, only resentment for losing access. That letter closed a door inside me I hadn't realized was still open. I met with my lawyer again the next day. I want to update everything, I said. My will, my beneficiaries, all of it. He nodded without surprise. You're protecting yourself, he said. That's not cruelty. We made changes, legal ones, final ones. For the first time, my future belonged to me. I sold my house 2 months later. It held too many memories, most of them shaped by sacrifice instead of joy. I moved into a smaller apartment filled with light, close to parks, cafes, and people who knew me as me, not as help. I donated part of my savings to organizations that protect seniors from financial abuse. The rest, I lived, I traveled, took art classes, volunteered, laughed with new friends who never once asked me for money. One evening, while sitting on my balcony watching the city lights, Eleanor asked me a quiet question. Do you ever regret it? I thought carefully before answering. I regret that it took a lawsuit to teach me my worth, I said. But no, I don't regret choosing myself. Some nights I still think of Max, not with anger, but with clarity. Love cannot exist where respect is absent, and blood alone doesn't make a family. Freedom has a cost, but losing yourself costs far more. And just when I believed my story was over, one final truth emerged. One that completely changed how I understood love, loyalty, and peace. Winning in court didn't feel like victory the way I expected it to. There was no applause, no sense of triumph, just a strange, hollow quiet that followed me home like a shadow. The judge's words echoed in my mind, confirming my competence, my rights, my freedom, but they didn't fill the space where my family used to be. Max didn't call, neither did Lena. Days passed, then weeks. The silence was deliberate, sharp, and final. I realized something painful. As long as I was useful, I was present in their lives. Once the money disappeared, so did I. My days became slower, calmer. I woke up without anxiety twisting in my chest. I drank my coffee on the balcony instead of checking my phone for emergencies that were never really emergencies. I cooked meals for myself, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to enjoy them. Still, grief came in waves. Not grief for the people I lost, but for the belief I had carried for years. The belief that sacrifice guaranteed love. That if I gave enough, endured enough, stayed quiet enough, I would be valued. One afternoon, Eleanor noticed I was quieter than usual. "You're grieving," she said gently. "Not for them, but for the dream." That hit harder than anything said in court. She was right. I wasn't missing Max and Lena as they were. I was mourning the family I thought I had, the future I imagined where love would finally be returned. Then the letter arrived. No envelope return address, just Max's handwriting, unmistakable. "You chose strangers over family. You embarrassed us. Don't expect forgiveness." I sat at the table holding the paper, my hands steady, my heart oddly calm. There was no apology, no regret, just resentment that I had refused to continue playing my role. That letter did something important. It closed a door inside me. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "I want to update everything," I said. "My will, my beneficiaries, all of it." He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. "You're choosing clarity," he said, "not revenge." I sold my house soon after. It held too many memories shaped by sacrifice instead of joy. I moved into a smaller apartment filled with sunlight, near a park where people smiled and spoke to me without expectation. I donated part of my savings to organizations that protect seniors from financial exploitation. The rest I used to live. I traveled. I painted. I laughed again, real laughter, not the polite kind. I surrounded myself with people who valued my presence, not my wallet. One evening, as the city lights flickered on below my balcony, Eleanor asked me quietly, "Do you ever regret it?" I thought for a long moment. "I regret that I didn't choose myself sooner," I said. "But no, I don't regret waking up. Freedom came late in my life, but it came honestly. And for the first time, I felt at peace. But just when I believed my journey had finally settled, one last realization surfaced. One that completely redefined what family truly means. Continue and write part 8. As per my above given instructions, I used to believe family was something you endured, you stayed, you sacrificed, you forgave endlessly, and no matter how much it hurt, you told yourself it was worth it, because blood was thicker than pain. That belief died quietly one afternoon, months after the trial. I was sitting in a small cafe near my apartment, sketching in a notebook I had recently bought. Across from me sat Eleanor, laughing softly as she told me about her granddaughter's latest adventure. The warmth in her voice struck me unexpectedly. This was family, not an obligation, not fear, not manipulation, choice. For the first time, I understood something I had resisted my entire life. Family isn't defined by who you give birth to. It's defined by who treats you with dignity. Max never reached out again. Neither did Lena. At first, I waited. I told myself maybe time would soften things. Maybe distance would bring clarity. But weeks turned into months, and silence became the answer. And strangely, it stopped hurting. I realized I wasn't losing something anymore. I was gaining something. Space to breathe, think, and exist without guilt. I joined a local art group. On Tuesdays, we met in a bright studio filled with laughter and paint stained hands. No one asked about my finances. No one measured my value by what I could provide. They only asked what I was working on and whether I was happy. That question used to terrify me. Now it felt natural. One afternoon after class, a woman named Maria invited me to her home for dinner. I hesitated, old habits whispering that I was imposing, but she smiled and said, "I want your company, not your help." At her table, surrounded by people who genuinely wanted me there, something inside me healed. I thought back to the wedding I wasn't invited to, the humiliation, the phrase only special people. It had shattered me at the time. Now I understood the truth. I'd always been special, just not to people who saw love as a transaction. I visited my husband's grave one quiet morning and told him everything: how I had finally stopped trying to earn love, how I'd learned to protect myself, how I was living again. "I wish I had done this sooner," I whispered. But grief didn't answer back with regret. It answered with peace. One evening, while sorting old photographs, I found a picture of Max as a little boy, smiling widely, his arms wrapped around my neck. I didn't cry. I smiled softly and placed it back in the box. Some chapters don't end the way we want. They end the way they must. I learned that love without respect is not love, it's control. That generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you whole. At 72 years old, I wasn't starting over. But there was one final lesson life had left to teach me. One that changed how I saw my past, my future, and myself forever. Continue and write. Part 9 as per my above given instructions. The final lesson didn't come with drama. No courtroom, no accusations, no raised voices. It came quietly, on an ordinary morning when I realized something extraordinary. I was happy, not relieved, not distracted, not managing, genuinely happy. I was watering the plants on my balcony, humming without realizing it when the thought stopped me cold. For decades, happiness had been conditional. I was happy if Max was okay, happy if Lena approved, happy if everyone needed me. Now, my happiness belonged to me alone. That realization felt heavier than the courtroom verdict ever had. I thought about the years I had confused love with usefulness, how I believed being needed meant being valued, how I had ignored the quiet ache of being invisible as long as my help was acknowledged. I hadn't just given money, I had given permission. Permission to be overlooked, to be disrespected, to be reduced to what I could provide. And when I withdrew that permission, they called me unstable. That truth hurt, but it also freed me. One afternoon, Eleanor asked me a question I hadn't considered before. If Max called tomorrow and apologized, truly apologized, what would you do? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the humiliation, the legal attack, the lies. Then I thought about the woman I had become. "I would listen," I said finally, "but I wouldn't go back." She nodded. "That's how I know you're healed." Healing, I learned, isn't forgetting. It's remembering without bleeding. I wrote a letter that night, not to Max, but to myself. I wrote about the woman who had sacrificed silently, who believed love was something she had to earn. I forgave her for not knowing better, for staying too long, for hoping too hard. Then I thanked her for surviving. Weeks later, I volunteered at a local center that supports seniors navigating financial abuse. I listened to stories that sounded painfully familiar: mothers, fathers, grandparents afraid to say no. I told them my story, not as a warning, but as proof. It's never too late to choose yourself. I saw recognition in their eyes, relief, courage beginning to spark. That mattered more than any inheritance ever could. Sometimes at night, I still wondered if Max thought of me, not with longing, but with clarity. Did he ever understand what he lost? Then I realized something else. That question no longer controlled me. I had stopped measuring my worth by someone else's conscience. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't demand validation. It simply allows you to breathe. What happened next didn't involve my son at all, but it confirmed beyond doubt that choosing myself was the most powerful decision I'd ever made. Continue and write part 10, as per my above given instructions. The moment that confirmed everything didn't come from my past, it came from my future. One afternoon, I stood in an airport terminal holding a boarding pass with my name on it. No one had asked me where I was going. No one needed an explanation. No one depended on me to make their life easier. The destination didn't matter as much as the feeling. I was going because I wanted to. As the plane lifted into the sky, I looked out the window and felt something I had rarely allowed myself to feel: excitement without guilt. I wasn't abandoning anyone. I wasn't neglecting responsibilities. I was simply living. During that trip, I met people who knew nothing about my past. They didn't see me as a mother, a provider, or a solution to their problems. They saw me as a woman with stories, curiosity, and laughter, and that was enough. When I returned home, my life continued to grow, not dramatically, but steadily. I painted more. I traveled again. I filled my calendar with things that nourished me instead of draining me. I stopped apologizing for having boundaries. I stopped explaining my decisions to people who didn't respect them. I stopped confusing loneliness with peace. One evening, while sitting on my balcony watching the sunset, I thought about the woman I had been just a year earlier, waiting for calls that only came with requests, believing silence meant love was coming later. That woman didn't fail. She survived long enough to wake up. I don't know what became of Max and Lena. I heard they moved into a smaller place, that they struggled, that they had to figure things out on their own. I hope they did. But their story is no longer mine. Mine is about reclaiming dignity, about learning that love cannot exist where respect is absent, about understanding that generosity should never cost you your freedom. At 72 years old, I didn't lose my family. I found myself. And that discovery changed everything. If there is one thing I would say to anyone listening to my story, it's this: you do not owe anyone your life in exchange for their approval. You do not have to suffer to prove your worth, and it is never too late to choose peace. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop giving and start living.